In this lesson, we're going to discuss the next step in the rigging process, which is generating the control splines. However, before I do that, I would like to point out a few, I guess we could call it tips and tricks for getting your model to work or give you better results when you use BonyFace. The first one is focused on the eyelids. You'll notice the eyelids here are a little down. The eye is not wide open. This is the model from the Script Attack website, so obviously it was set up, in the most efficient way possible to work with the BonyFace rigging system, and it makes perfect sense in that the control splines that will influence the eyelids need to be able to see the eyelid, and if we have that pushed up so the eyes are wide open, it's going to be very difficult to get those control splines in there. So when you're building your model, you want to make sure that your eyelids are sort of half closed. The model looks a bit sleepy maybe because we want to keep the eyes down, the lids down, so that we can see that geometry. Something that I do myself also is I open the mouth slightly for the very same reason. It allows me to get in there and be able to add the control splines on the appropriate upper and lower lip areas. If the mouth is completely closed, it just makes it a little more difficult to place the control splines. And the last thing I want to mention before we generate the splines is the Move Lid Center option here over in the BonyFace menu. I mentioned this briefly in the last lesson, but I'm not sure if it was completely clear, so I just wanted to clarify some things with this. I'm going to turn the head off for a second so we can see the eyes. And even here, right next to the Move Eyelid Center, there's a little button to make the eyes see-through. And this slider moves this control object right here. And this control object is for the eyelids, as the name suggests, move lid centers. It's not for the rotation of the eyes, it's for the blinking of the lids, basically. So for the most part, I typically put it towards the back of the eyeball, somewhere around here. But what you might find is once you get through the rigging and then the skinning process, that the lids may not move correctly, and it might be because this needs to be placed in a different location. If that's the case, then you kind of have to go back through the process, readjust this, and then re-rig and reskin. So again, I just wanted to clarify what the Move Lid Center is used for. It's for the eyelids and not the eyes themselves. All right, I'll turn the see-through back off and turn the head back on. So now we're ready to generate the splines. So again, this is where you'd want to save your model prior to creating the splines, because the splines you'll want to save as their own separate file. So in order to generate the splines, we would come over here to the Spline menu and click on the Create Splines button. And you'll see that the system starts generating all of the different control splines. And we have a lot of them when we're done. So the basic process is really just to get in here and grab these control objects and move them to the appropriate location on the model's head. Because ultimately what these represent are the bones that are going to deform the model. Now, a really nice guide that I found is on the Script Attack website here. So if I scroll back up to the top, I'm under tutorials, and right here under the tutorials, if I scroll down, there is a series of really nice, highly detailed illustrations showing you where each of the control groups should be placed. And the ones that tend to get quite confusing, like around the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, are very well outlined here. So I would suggest using this as a resource for placing your splines. So if I switch back over to Max here, so I would start moving those. Now, there are some fantastic tools here to help manage the positioning of these splines, in addition to simply just moving them manually. So over here in the BonyFace menu, we have a button here called Adjust Splines. So if I click on that, it opens up this small menu with a lot of really nice, powerful features. The first one that I want to point out is the selection set. That's this group of buttons here. So we have a drop-down list that allows me to choose different groups of control splines. So now I have the brow selected, forehead low, or forehead up. This will also allow me to hide groups, which can come in very handy when we get to areas like the eye, and there's a lot of control splines in there. Once we adjust the set, we can hide them, or maybe we want to hide the ones we haven't adjusted yet and just have the one showing that we were working with. So that's a nice feature. Once you choose a particular group, in this case forehead up, I can hit the All button, and that will give me all of the control objects in that group. I can also select each control object in that group by choosing the 1, 2, 3, and 4 buttons, or in some cases there might even be 6 control objects in that group. I can use the left and right arrows here to toggle through all of the control objects in that group. So that's a nice feature for selecting control groups or control objects within a control group. The other tools we have available in the menu here allow us to actually move and adjust these control points. So again, there's a lot of different options and buttons in here, and for this set of videos I'd like to boil it down to just the maybe the most widely used or prevalent tools. So the first one I'd like to point out are the draw tools. So we have draw line and draw point. I don't really use draw point all that often, but I use draw line a lot, and I'd like to cover that one first. So what we need to do is we need to make sure we have an appropriate control group selected. So I have forehead up selected at this point, and then I'm going to activate the draw line button. And what that will do is it'll give me a blue cursor that will allow me to just draw a line across the surface of the model like this. And once I let go of the mouse button, you'll see that it takes that control group, in this case forehead up, and it places it on the surface where I drew that line. And you can see that my line was a bit squiggly. So then the next step would be to get into some of these tools over here, which can help us with this squiggly line. Now, fundamentally, I could just come in here and move these around, but we have some more precise tools here. And the ideal is to place these control objects on vertices. It's not a necessity, but that's what you would like to try to strive for as you adjust these different control points. So the first one I want to cover is called Specify. And what Specify will allow me to do is take a selected control object, and it looks for the nearest vertex and snaps it to it. So if I have this control object selected and I hit Specify, you see it snapped into this vertex, which was the closest. If I choose this control object and hit Specify, it snaps in there. And I'll grab this one, hit Specify, and then finally this one, Specify, and they snap right into place. So that's a really nice feature. So that's one workflow that I found is really nice and efficient, is to choose a group and then go into line mode, draw a line roughly in the location where we want your control spline, and then use Specify to fit those onto specific vertices. I'll go ahead and do that again with the forehead low. So I have forehead low selected. I'll choose draw line, and I'll draw a line right along here. And then I'll zoom in on it a little bit and start choosing each individual control object and hit the Specify button, and it snaps it to the closest vertex. just like that. Very nice feature. Now in this case though, I think that I don't really want this control object to be here on this vertex. I want it to be over here. So I could move it so that it's closer to this vertice and then choose specify, or I'm actually going to undo this. Now to undo the movement of the control objects, it's not Control Z on the keyboard. You have to hit the undo last operation button right here. It's a little red hand. So now it takes it back to where it was. So this is where the put button comes in handy, and I use this one a lot too. The put button will allow me to take a selected control object and then specify an area to snap it to. So if I activate put, I can now snap it to this location here. And I might want to do that with this one also. So I'll choose this control object, hit the put button, and maybe I want to put it here instead. Or, as I mentioned before, you don't necessarily need to keep them directly on the surface of the object. So I could place it maybe somewhere in this location. Now if I want to make sure it stays specifically on the surface, but I don't want to snap it to an actual vertice, I could use the other button here called stick. And what stick will do is it will take the control object, project it along its y-axis until it hits the surface of your model. So you see it hit the surface here. And actually I don't quite like that, so I might move it up a little more and then hit stick again. And now it's in this location here. Now at any point in the spline adjustment process, you may want to save your splines, and this is what I had been referring to at the beginning of this lesson and even in the last lesson. You know, as you start to adjust these, once you make a major adjustment and you like it, this can be very time consuming, so you'll want to save the splines. So even though I'm not completely done, that's okay. I can save them, reload them if I'm coming back to it later on, maybe the next day or something, and continue to work. So in order to save the splines, I would come over to the spline section of our interface here, and I would hit the Save Splines button. So if I click on that, I can save it. I'll call this one Test BFS, or maybe I'll name it something like, as I adjusted the browse, so I would just type browse so I know where I am with it at this point and hit save. So now those are saved, and I can close out of Max, come back in, load the model without the splines, and then I would generate the splines again and then load in my saved splines. Actually, I'm going to demonstrate that process. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to reset 3ds Max at this point. I'm going to close out of BonyFace altogether just to make sure that resets also. So I'll go back to my File menu, and I'm going to choose the base model here. So I have my model again. I'll open up BonyFace, open up my menu, and I'm going to pick the head, and then I'll generate the splines. So I'll come over here to the spline menu and generate those. And then I can hit the, instead of the save button, obviously, I'll do the load splines button here. And in this case, I'm going to open up a fully adjusted set of splines so that this video, again, is not 2 hours long. And you can see all my splines are adjusted. Here I have them around the eyelids, down here where the lips are, upper and lower lip, are adjusted appropriately. And then I'm ready for the next phase of the process, which is the rigging and skinning, which is what we'll cover in the next lesson.